funny how when you're like somehow in charge of something, when there's a little fluffle like that, and it seems like, oh, this is terrible, this is taking forever. It's probably like 1 minute, 2 minutes. It's okay. It was really beautiful coming back in during Kinhin, the walking meditation. It felt so settled in here. So I hope you enjoyed having a little more time to settle into the walking. I've been feeling for years that the normal Soto Zen time pattern gives kind of short shrift to the walking practice. It's often 40 minutes or 30 minutes of sitting and then only 10 minutes of walking, and then a minute or two of that gets taken up by explaining the pattern and getting back and stuff like that. So I thought it'd be nice to have a little more time to settle into walking. And if it's not your favorite yet, just give it time. Some people, for some reason, with the walking meditation, there can be this sort of hump, like it takes some while to kind of like, oh, okay. So really feeling your feet, really letting the body be deeply grounded in the earth, and just kind of feeling into how every step is a kind of a miracle. It's amazing that we can walk. One of many things we do, yeah, right, if you haven't been able to walk for a while, talk to Hana tonight. You appreciate it more when he comes back. Yeah, true, true. There's so many amazing things we do that we take so for granted, aren't there? And the main amazing thing we do that we take for granted is be alive. That's amazing. If you were here a couple weeks ago, I hope you got to hear Chris's great talk on anger and patience and collective karma. Really topical. And if you weren't here a couple weeks ago when Chris gave that talk, I want to give a shout out yet again to our administrator, Annie Chin. She gets all the talks onto YouTube and our website like right away. And on the phone, YouTube's really easy. I learned that. It's really easy to bring up Red Cedar Zen on your phone in the YouTube app, and you can keep up with the talks. Part of why I discovered that is on Sundays, we're doing a series of different speakers every week. So Sundays will be fun that way. Different people who have been head student and give Dharma talks here. And often in the past couple of years, we hardly, you hear them maybe once a year if you're lucky. So now we'll get to hear them every couple of months, hopefully. And anyway, I told them it really would be good if our talks really feel like a conversation, so it's not like these separate little talks. And so please listen to the previous week's talk. And then as I was writing this talk, I'm like, oh, I better I better live into that one. I've always tried, but I've not always been successful. So now it's easy on YouTube. I took a walk and Chris accompanied me to the park. A few little changes. I mentioned this in our newsletter, but just in case you're interested. Basically, not much is fundamentally different about Wednesday night from what we did the first, during the fall. But now that we do have our wonderful Sunday program, I thought we would just kind of emphasize a little more on Wednesday night, kind of longer and deeper, for want of a better word, dives into the Dharma, into the traditional teachings and materials. So I myself am now calling Wednesday night Dharma seminar, but you can call it Wednesday night or whatever you want to call it. And I simplified the service a little bit and now made a whole new version just to mess with you, You gotta trust your man. But then, we got a few minutes back on service, and I gave him the Kinhin, and it's all good. The other thing I wanted to mention is, have you run into these amazing Thai monks who are walking from Texas to Washington, D.C.? There's a lot about them on YouTube, and not so much on the headlines. Maybe eventually they'll make the headlines of the major media. Anyway, it's an incredible thing. They're walking for peace. And so we got inspired by that. And so we want to walk for peace too. We're not going to walk to D.C. But we're willing to walk in the rain. We're willing to walk silently. We're willing to walk on the earth. We're willing to walk with whoever comes to walk with us. And so we did a test out of this last Sunday. because there's another, our neighbors, our roommates were here on Sunday, so we didn't have this our Sunday practice. And it was amazing. Some of you were there. 75 people showed up who really wanted to walk for peace, in the rain. So we're going to do a few more of these in February and March. Info will be coming out. And we may not walk to DC, but we might walk. We hope to walk. We plan to walk. We say we're going to walk. We're going to walk from the Canadian border back home to here on March 7th. We'll walk for peace. And a shorter one on February 15th? 15th. So you can come or you can join for parts and more details to follow. Because, you got to do something, right? You got to do something. Anyway, that was a bunch of preamble stuff. I want to talk about the Heart Sutra that we just chanted. And it's chanted all the time in Zen temples all over the world. Most commonly chanted text. And yeah, feel free to open up your chant book again to page 5 if you want to remember what you just chanted, because it goes by fast. But it's an interesting thing for us always to be chanting with people who have chanted it for decades and people who are here for the first time tonight. Because it's a very strange text, actually. It doesn't make a lot of conventional sense. And it actually turns out to be kind of like lecture notes, It refers to a whole big pile of different Buddhist teachings and brings up a powerful theme about how we might more wisely understand the nature of our life and the nature of reality. So I want to spend the month, and at the rate I'm going, maybe more than a month. I can already see the pace, exploring the Heart Sutra in detail. So I hope that'll be interesting. We don't really know exactly where it came from or when it was written. I'll say more about that in a minute. But that it's called a sutra has particular meaning in the tradition. That means that these are the words of the Buddha. And so we can hear them that way. This is a teaching from the Buddha. But it's also true that historically that's unlikely. So we'll explore this a little bit as we look at these traditional texts. That there's a kind of devotional reality, which is wonderful and true in its devotional way. That this came straight from the Buddha. And therefore it's valid and important and worth practicing with, reciting, studying. Copying is another practice you can do with sutras, traditional practice. Copy them with your hand, write them out in any language you want. But it's also a historical truth that there was a whole major sort of second wave of Buddhism that got called Mahayana. Well, it called itself Mahayana, which means the great way, the good way. We're the best. And for their stuff to make sense to the Buddhist world, it had to be the teachings of the Buddha, because that's the true teachings. So historically, they had to do a little bit of fast-footed creativity to explain how it is that this text that nobody could remember existing before does exist now, and the historical Buddha was hundreds of years gone, So this was probably created somewhere between 500 and 700 years after the death of the historic Buddha. So those are maybe a little bit, they seem in opposition to us, and I think in Western culture we tend to throw away the devotional part pretty quick and say, well, what's the truth? What really happened? But then you talk to historians, and even they will tell you, well, we can't ever really know what happened. But there's evidence for this or there's evidence for that. So even historical truth is a little dodgy, maybe. But I think in our practice we've realized it really helps our hearts and helps us to synthesize the value of these teachings if we also take them seriously, If we're also like, yes, this is definitely from the Buddha, even if historically that's not the case exactly. unless we get lost in some kind of dynamic there between history and devotion, we can also always be asking ourselves, how do I practice with this? How is this useful to me in my everyday life? And part of why I wanted to get into this again, we study this from time to time, but it's been quite a while, is with this one, it's pretty hard to tell. It's pretty hard to say at a glance, how do I practice with this? Because it's so kind of cryptic, you know? So somewhere around the dawn of the Common Era, a new movement of Buddhist thought arose that was part of this bigger Mahayana movement. And they called all this the teachings of the Prajnaparamita. Teachings of the Prajnaparamita. Prajnaparamita means something like the insight and wisdom that goes beyond. It's not just knowing a bunch of stuff. It's more of a process, more of a awareness and an understanding than a bunch of information. An insight that goes beyond. What does it go beyond? Everything, you know. All limited views and ideas and concepts. And if you've been around with us recently on Sunday morning, you may have heard this term paramita, because it's also part of a list of 6 practices and ways of understanding our lives. And it's number 6, but the one that is said to include all the others. The other 5 being generosity, ethical living, patience, energy, and meditation. So they got fired up about this topic of the insight that goes beyond. And they really wanted to explore it. And it was a literary explosion. Earliest Buddhism, not so literary, all oral. These later Buddhisms were very literary. And these guys could write. The first major text in this literature is called the Prajnaparamita Sutra in 100,000 lines. It's 100,000 lines of Sanskrit verse. And it's a big fat book in translation, as you'd expect. And what this is all about is how can we live in a way that awakens everybody, that goes beyond any limited view of who and what we are, that helps us understand that we all are Buddha, you know. We just lost sight of that somewhere along the way. And in some ways it's encouragements for all kinds of meditative disciplines, and we spent most of the evening tonight, right, being silent in meditation, which is good for us. But also has a certain logic to it. They're trying to help us reimagine the way we think and the way we understand in a fresh way. So it's really fabulous literature. And after writing a 100,000 line version and a 60,000 line version and all that stuff, I guess they were also somewhat practical. Plus they didn't have printing press, so who's going to even read this stuff, you know? How many copies were there in the universe, you know? Not that many. Maybe they did, actually no, they did have the printing press, excuse me. Woodblock press, yeah, they did. So they decided we better do some shorter versions. So they did one in 300 lines. It's now called the Diamond Sutra. And this one we just chanted, the Heart Sutra, comes out to 25 or 35 lines in Sanskrit, depending on how you count it, how you write it out. So this is like the super condensed version. So it's not surprising it's a little cryptic, you know. They're trying to get something essential from hundreds of thousands of lines of text down to 25, 35. And then they got even more into that, and they boiled the whole thing down to one letter. One letter, the Sanskrit letter, yeah, the Sanskrit letter, ah. And that's a whole practice. You can write that letter. It's usually written in a script called Devangari, and you can say that as a mantra. And it's good, like a sigh, you know, it's beautiful. Be good for us. We should practice just that. Ah. So the central idea that's brought forward in the Heart Sutra, which is in all the rest of this literature, but here it's really central in this summary version. Central idea that's there, which is designed to help us become wiser, more compassionate, more free, and really take up this idea of how do we help everybody, which they called the ideal of the Bodhisattva, the awakening being. So the central idea there is pointed to by a very weird term. These are the teachings of emptiness. This is empty, that's empty, and there's a lot of negation in there. Maybe you notice, know this, know that, know the other thing, which is another way of talking about emptiness. So that is a direct translation of the word they used in Sanskrit. It's the word, everyday word in Sanskrit for being empty. The trick of it, though, is that it's not just being empty. It's being empty of something, or empty of everything. It's pointing to something that doesn't fit our brains very well. Because our brains, as we learn language and we learn concepts, we create a map of the universe, right? You know, this is a that, that's a this. I can think about it, I can see it, I can touch it, I can move it around, I can write about it, you know, I can text about it. All these things, right? All these things. People, objects, emotions, you know. Everything you can think of is like a concept, right? There's a concept for it. There's a word for it. How would we even talk about it or think about it if there was no word or concept for it? And these teachings say that when we do that, we kind of lock things down in a certain way. Because if it's a this, it's not a that. We create all these separations everywhere, like little walls, creating a maze of a reality that nobody can escape from, you know. And the concepts are useful. They allow us to function in the everyday world, but unbeknownst to us, these teachings all suggest, and I really think it's true, they limit us radically. They make us small, frightened, needing to defend, you know, egoistical and all this. And so the teachings of emptiness encouraging us to take a fresh look at our very conceptualization of the universe, you know. And how do you look at that? It's hard to do, because what tools do you have available? Like the very same concepts that these teachings are suggesting that would be helpful for us to go beyond, you know. And the technical term they came up for here, which may or may not be helpful to us right now, is they said what everything's empty of, they had to make up their own word. Everything is empty of something called own being. O-W-N, like its own, and being, so like separate being. The word in Sanskrit is svabhava, svabhava. It's fun to say that, svabhava. So things don't have separation. And so if they don't have separation, then what do they have, you know? Interpenetration, openness, boundlessness, freedom, you know, freedom. So there's a lot of ways to try to talk about this, and all of them kind of fall short because we only have language to talk about the idea that reality is beyond anything we can use language for and conceptualize. And of course the most important concept to us, and also maybe the most limiting, is the concept of, right, me. I'm this person, this is my history, these are my preferences, these are my strengths and weaknesses, right? This is my problem, my many, many problems, you know. And we really believe all that, you know. And in the conventional world it's not wrong, right? It's not based on nothing, you know. There's evidence for all this. And plus people go calling you that thing, then that kind of confirms that you're probably that thing, you know. Calling you by your name. But there's something so limited about the way it all shakes down, you know. It makes us inflexible and stuck. And then it's really hard to help people, right? Really hard to really be there for someone else. And even the idea that they are something else makes it harder to be with them. Can we see them as not any different than us ourselves? So we could think about this in terms of like objects, maybe, and because thinking about this in terms of ourselves is a you know, a real challenge. And it's just so everyday. Like you see a car going by, you just say, okay, that's a car, you know. Maybe you're into cars and say it's a Hyundai or it's a whatever. Maybe you're not into cars, just a car. Color, it has a color, right? So these are all words and concepts. And a car isn't a bad example because there's an ancient metaphor here, which is basically the same, which asks us to think about, well, what makes a cart a cart? Like a wooden cart with wheels that you would pull with a cow or an ox or a horse or something. And it really kind of questions us around thinking about how do we decide anything is anything, you know? We have a way that we do it, but does it really hold up if we really think carefully? So in this text it says, well, what if it didn't have wheels? Is it still a cart? Or is it then a cart missing its wheels? What if you take away the handles, you know? Then is a cart missing its wheels and its handles, or is it just like a wooden box, you know? And it goes on, you know? Is it a cart if it doesn't have hubs, you know? Is it a cart if it doesn't have this, it doesn't have that? At what point does it become a cart? At what point is it no longer a cart? It's totally arbitrary, really, right? You know? You can think about your own body the same way, right? What makes it your body, you know? You probably still think this is me if you don't have an arm anymore, right? This is still me, but what if you don't have your memories? Is that still you? And of course, this does happen to us. We can be in conditions through aging or illness and all kinds of things where we lose all our memories and don't remember who we are. And we say about such a person, well, they really aren't themselves anymore, but we still call them by the same name. So I guess we still think they are that person, but they're not, right? They are and they aren't. So does all this stuff really matter is a reasonable next question. Why am I going on about this? Isn't this just like philosophy? Sometimes the Buddha, when people would ask him like philosophical questions, what's the real nature of the universe, he would just refuse to answer. And he would say, you know, all I teach is suffering and the end of suffering. That's it, you know. This other stuff's not important. But the later Buddhists felt like, well, here's something that actually does, it might look like philosophy at first, but there's something deeper going on here that does free us from suffering. I have an example I want to share, and before about how this is actually useful. And before I share this example, I just want you to know that I don't really know that this example is a true example of a result of studying emptiness. Because I have been around this stuff for a long time. One would never say one was good at emptiness, like that would not fit with the whole teaching, you know. But emptiness does seep in. And it's not just an idea, it's not just a philosophy, it's something you can feel, it's something you can appreciate. It's something that changes you. Well, anyway, I had a wondering if emptiness was behind something that happened to me the other morning. And it's about the collective suffering of our nation right now. Like pretty all of us, I've been so horrified watching the videos and reading the stories about what some of the agents of immigration and customs enforcement are doing. And in the morning practice we do online, and on Sundays too, we chant the names of people who have died recently. So we've been chanting the names of 2 of those people who were killed by agents in Minnesota. So it's horrible, isn't it? And how do you hold it? How can you be with this? And maybe like you, I've been to protests and seen and heard about other protests and efforts to resist. And there's a great variety of ways that people talk and try to understand in those, but often there's a thread that disturbs me. This really kind of aggressive, how do we fight back? How do we fight back? And you've seen the expression about ice. That's just a profanity. Just a profanity and ice. Is that how we meet this, with profanity? And that was something I really appreciated in Chris's talk. She brought up our old buddy Shantideva talking about anger. Does anger actually really help? Those teachings say no, doesn't help. It's understandable. It's understandable. So a couple of mornings ago, I had read some of this news and or watched one of those videos. And I was sitting in my study, and what suddenly came to me from I don't know where was this wave of compassion for those agents. And it wasn't like a thinking thing. It wasn't like reminding myself there are people too, something about their training or how they came to be acting the way that they do, or speculating about their childhood or anything like that. It wasn't that kind of thing. It was a feeling of openness, a feeling of compassion. I sort of felt remembering that these are people just like me. And the thought that arose with that was that each of them loves someone and is loved by someone. And then, those kind of explaining ideas came up too. Sure, we're full of ideas. The brain rarely stops. So I thought of ideas to support that feeling, but what really touched me was the feeling, like I felt so relieved. I felt like this is better ground to be on, even as I work to oppose these actions. So somehow some level of separation that was deeply in me, and we reinforce it in each other, don't we, the way we talk and think and say how terrible all that is, and it is terrible. So this is not just ancient Buddhist philosophy, right? We need this now. It's a certain kind of, it sort of opens to a certain kind of unconditional love, actually. Because if everything's empty of separation, how is there then anything but love? So I want to share that moment. And, I've had plenty of anger and upset and fear too, like we all have. Another translation of this tricky term emptiness, which is much beloved, is from the great Vietnamese teacher Thich Nhat Hanh. He made up an English word pretty good because English was his third language. He made up the word interbeing, which then he could inflect different ways. So he said, if you really appreciate emptiness, you see that everything inter-is, or inter-bees, or inter-exists. And here it's not celebrating, it doesn't sound like emptiness, it sounds like the fullness of everything, right? That everything includes everything else, absolutely. And he has great little logical things like this lectern made from a tree, so it includes the sun, right? It includes the rain. Includes the people who cut the tree and milled the lumber, and our dear friend Neil who put this together for us. So beautiful. So everything is empty is also that everything is full of everything, which is also love. So that's kind of what this whole thing's about, this Heart Sutra. Let's start the text, and then we'll get to continue it next week. So you can open your chant book to page 5, and then I also, if people can help me, brought you a handout. Just trying to get out of its plastic here. Okay, got it. Thank you. It's a bit of Buddhist geekery, but hopefully it'll be helpful to us. It's several different translations of each passage in the Heart Sutra. And if you're a note-taker type person, you're welcome to take notes on one of these. I don't know if I'm going to say anything that's worth taking notes on, but I do have pens up here if you want a pen. And I was thinking at the end of the evening, if you want to take that home, you're welcome, but if you want to leave it here, then it'll be here for you next week. So that might be simpler. We can just stack them on the little table in the lobby. And for Deb and Heather, I have a link for you. Let me paste that into the chat. 1 second. There it is. You want a pen? We don't necessarily all need pens. Maybe raise your hand if you want a pen. Oops. Okay, I'm just navigating new Zoom 1 second here. You can take a look at all that. It's a lot of stuff.
Recording in progress.
Which we'll go through slowly. Oops. Should mute this one, huh? Okay. Now we're good. I just cloned myself on the screen there. So one of the things you'll see on this very first page, which might surprise you, and this is mostly what I want to look at tonight, is that there's a longer version than our version. Our version, which comes through the Chinese tradition, and I'll talk more about the translator of it, he's an interesting character later, kind of starts a couple paragraphs in. And the longer version, which is looked at in Sanskrit and translated into Tibetan, has like an intro, has a prologue. The first part of the prologue is just boilerplate sutra. All kinds of sutras had this. So I think probably this was added as part of the, this would be trivializing to say cell job for the sutra. But it sets the scene. So here's the scene. This is a translation from the Sanskrit by Edward Kanza. Thus have I heard at one time. So this is before our chant book. Thus have I heard at one time. The Lord was dwelling at Rajagriha on the Vulture Peak, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time the Lord was immersed in the concentration of the Dharma lineage called the perception of the profound. At the same time, the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the Mahasattva, was moving in the deep course of the perfection of wisdom. And she saw that the five aggregates were empty of inherent existence. So we have a place where this is happening. We have a great community there. You always have to have the time and the place and the, who's there. But this one's unusual. So the Lord means the Buddha. This is Kanza's language. I was tempted to change it, but I'm like, yeah. So here the Buddha is not giving a talk. He's in a deep meditation state. He's in a deep meditation state called the perception of the profound. And there's a really important character amongst the assembly named Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. Mahasattva means the great being, so this is a really important person, figure / God. And Avalokiteshvara, who's the Bodhisattva of compassion actually, was in some kind of deep study, deep meditation herself, of this perfection of wisdom, of this prajnaparamita. And Kanza from the 50s genders Avalokiteshvara as male, but we usually gender her as female, but you can gender her any way you want. Male, female, both. And Avalokiteshvara had some kind of deep insight that must be important about the five aggregates. So that's the scene that as we begin our sutra. And then the second part is kind of unique. This is a little bit happens in the Lotus Sutra, a few other places, but this is pretty rare. Usually somebody gives a talk. Usually the Buddha gives a talk, or the Buddha tells somebody else to give a talk. And here, the Buddha actually reaches into the minds of the people there. It says, then through the Buddha's might, the Venerable Shariputra said to the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, asked the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, how should a son or daughter of good family train who wishes to practice the course of the deep perfection of wisdom? And the commentaries say that, it says it right in the text actually, that Shariputra, who is a monk, and also an early monk from early Buddhism, time is not such a thing here, they can exist over many times. The commentaries say Shariputra would never have known to ask this question if the Buddha hadn't inspired him to ask it. And the commentaries also say that Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, being in this deep meditation state, was also inspired by the Buddha, although the text here didn't say that very directly. And then our whole sutra in our chant book is Avalokitesvara's answer. So isn't that fun? This is the setup. If you've been chanting this for a while, there's a setup that maybe you didn't know about. There's a whole setup to this. And just a little more for tonight. Now that you know the setup and the theme is about this emptiness. Well, one thing is how wonderfully sort of real and beyond real the setting is. That's fun. This place, Rajagriha on the Vulture Peak, Michael was there a couple months ago. And Michael will probably tell us that you couldn't actually have fit hundreds or thousands of people up there in real life. How many people do fit up there? 30, 40? Something like that, yeah. So it's both real and beyond real, which also kind of presages this emptiness teachings. Everything's real and it's beyond our understanding of reality. And the insight, the first level of insight, which kind of leads to all the other insights here, is something about, what does he say? Something called aggregates, which is a translation of a Sanskrit term, skandhas. And our chant book, does it say skandhas? It says aggregates also, thank you, Mari. So sometimes it's translated different ways, or sometimes the Sanskrit's left alone. Thank you very much. So aggregates. And what the aggregates refer to is us. So the first thing, the thing that Avalokitesvara saw is beings are empty. Because early Buddhism had a sort of like warm up to the ideas of the sutra. Early Buddhism said, well, the way to lighten up your egotistical sense of self is to recognize that as hard as you can look, you're never going to exactly find a me in there, you know? You're definitely going to feel something, the body, right? So that's form, which is the first aggregate. And here I'm looking at the second paragraph of our chant book, where it says form does not differ from emptiness. That's the first thing you'll see. Like, well, there seems to be something here, right? This is me, this is my form. But then there's four more. The second one in our chant book's translated as sensations. Sometimes it's translated as feelings. The second thing that you notice when you look around at your experience is some stuff's pleasant and some stuff isn't. Maybe it's full on icky or painful. Some stuff's meh. And you should watch this next week. This is really a good thing to do for homework or home practice. See if you can notice the second skandha, the second aggregate, which is the aggregate of feeling or feeling tone. It's not emotions exactly. Emotions come a little later. It's the way we kind of lean in and lean out of things constantly all the time. Like if we really kind of quieted down the thinking and listened to the background music of our mind, you know, behind all those clever thoughts and worries and random images and blah, 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 don't you think it's a kind of a sound kind of like, right? And it's constant, right? It's constant, you know? Everything we encounter, the mind's sorting into good stuff, bad stuff, don't care stuff, you know? Mildly or extremely, you know, but it's constantly happening. So you'll see that that's happening, right, if you look at your consciousness. Is that you? Guess so. You know, we have preferences. I guess that's me. I don't know. So that's the second of these five aggregates that Avalokitesvara found to be empty or boundless or deeper or further or more beyond than we can ever imagine. Sometimes it gets translated as perceptions too, which is a little bit confusing. And the next thing that we'll notice for sure, and this we are well aware of, you know, is we are full of mental stuff, you know, which are translated here as formations. Thoughts, emotions, random images, just the, you know, the brilliant insights and the gunk, you know. It's all moving around in our mind all the time. And maybe that's what we most likely think is me. You know, we think I'm my thoughts, which is a huge advantage to Zazen because there's times when the thoughts do get a little quieter, and you can watch the thoughts a little more carefully. And after a while, you're like, nah, that can't be that can't be me, right? It's too like ridiculous and random. And if you sit a little longer, you see even the most convincing and interesting and powerful or difficult or upsetting thought. Next thing you know, it's gone again. So, and we could say that's me thinking. We talk that way conventionally, but these teachings are suggesting it's just a flow of thoughts. It's just these mental formations coming and going. So is that exactly you? So this is early Buddhism. Buddha's like, oh, that can't be you. And then there's some kind of overall sense of something that's always happening that could be called consciousness. But that's so slippery, you can't even hold on to it. Is that you? And so the Buddha, early Buddhism was saying, yeah, you could just break it all down into like these categories. It's just different categories of experience, and none of them seem to be exactly me. So is there really a me? To kind of deconstruct. But it's implied in early Buddhism that those categories are real things. This later teaching is saying, nah, even that. Don't rest in that. You're not just 5 heaps of stuff. The idea of heaps is empty too. So it's even more radical. The freedom goes deeper than, okay, I realize that I'm not just my limited idea of me. I'm like this variety of experiences. And that's more free. I don't mind being a variety of experiences, and it's just what's happening. But these teachings are saying, no, you can go deeper. You can go deeper. And on it will go. I want to say a little bit about books, and then I want to see if anybody has some thought or comment or question. I'll say a little more about that in a minute. There's dozens and dozens of really interesting books about the Heart Sutra in English. It's probably the most written about text in all of Buddhism. Probably because it's short and partly because it's cryptic, It wants explaining. And the very last page, the very back of this handout has these listed, so you have this information there. But if you want to just get one book, and you don't have to, we're designing this so you can just show up. Whichever night you can show up on Wednesday, just show up, and hopefully it'll be interesting. But if you want to get a little more into it and you have time, the one I most recommend is a nice slim little book. You can easily, I think, keep up with us in this, by Thich Nhat Hanh, called The Heart of Understanding. The Heart of Understanding. Slim little book. The cover won't look like this. I republish them regularly because his books are perennially popular. And that was published in, I think, the 90s. 88, okay, thank you. Oh. Interestingly, if you want to go a little deeper on this stuff, Thich Nhat Hanh never was very happy with this emptiness talk. He was always worried, I think, that it was confusing to people and maybe it made it sound like nothing matters. And so, towards the end of his career, right before he had the major stroke that ended up being, the beginning of the end for his physical life, he made a whole new translation and did a whole new, longer commentary. And that's called The Other Shore. The Other Shore. 2020 something. It's on there. So those are both good. Third one I'm looking at again is a real classic. This is a scholar who was active in the 50s and 60s. A few people I know studied with him a little bit at UC Berkeley in the early 70s, named Edward Kanza. He's still probably one of the most important scholars of this Prajnaparamita Sanskrit literature. One of these gonzo scholars that somehow digested thousands and thousands of original, pages in the original language, amazing. Some people just have a brain for that stuff, and maybe there's nothing else they could do in their lives, probably. Anyway, it's called Buddhist Wisdom, the Diamond Sutra and the Heart Sutra. That's really good. And then the last one I'm looking at for this series is called The Heart Sutra Explained, which is a little bit misleading maybe. Because this is Donald Lopez, who is a scholar I really like. He's at University of Michigan, I think. And then what he did is he's one of those guys like Kanza, and he digested a whole bunch of ancient Indian commentaries in the Heart Sutra. So every passage in the Heart Sutra he says, Prasanadi said this about it, and Dipanakara said this about it, and so-so said this about it. But it's all very deep and heavily annotated, and I'll bring up a few little quotes from this, but this is Buddhist geeks only. But it's fun. It's fun. But if you want just a really understandable, this makes sense for everyday life book on all this one's really great. Really great. Heart of Understanding. And like I said, you don't have to get the book. This isn't like a college seminar or something. There's no grades or outcome. No test, yeah. But the outcome actually we hope for is not memorizing a bunch of scholarly stuff. Is can we put this into action? Can we practice with this so we can just soften up? Not be quite so believing in this rigid way we are in our model of the universe and our concepts, and especially the way we conceptualize and self-limit ourselves and each other. Like they talk about dehumanizing. We do it all the time, right? We kind of, it's just baked into us. So this is a kind of a radical rehumanizing and reimagining of the world that they're talking about here. It's not just a philosophical thing. Another thing I told the rest of the teachers for Sundays is always leave lots of room for discussion. So fail, sorry. I just kind of had to get us started. I'll do better next week. But before we go, any questions, comments, noticings? Yeah, David. Uh, it's in the Sanskrit title is I'll bring it next week. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it does say that it's the heart of the Prajnaparamita teachings. Yeah, it's in the title. Hridaya is the Sanskrit. It's actually in the title, in the original title. Yeah. So at the heart of the matter, maybe we could say. Yeah, the Heart Sutra. What do you think about emptiness? Anyone have another way of talking about emptiness or thinking about emptiness, or did that spark something in you when I was going on about emptiness? It's a tough word. It sounds so cold, right? We don't like it. Some groups retranslate it as boundlessness, which is not actually what the word says, but it's also true. If it's empty of separation, then it is boundless, right? Without bound. Boundlessness. Any thoughts about all that? All right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. The missing part is empty of what? Yeah. 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 Actually, trees makes me think. Trees are great for emptiness practice too. So here would be another fun assignment. Besides noticing the internal dialogue of your mind. Hang out with a tree for a really long time. Stand or sit in front of the tree, gaze at it gently, breathe with the tree, be with the tree. And sooner or later, something about your concept of the tree does soften up, and you start to see and feel things that you didn't notice before. And you could do this with any object, but I think somehow trees are particularly good teachers of that. Uh-huh. No, cheating is empty of cheating, so do what you want to do. But report back. Report back. Yeah. Hmm. You see the trees, yeah. Yeah, the forest is there, yeah. Okay, friends, thank you for your patience as I kind of warm up on this. It'll be interesting to see where we go with it. May this be helpful to all of us and helpful to all beings in this suffering world.